At 1:17 in the morning, the starting blocks began to drip. The pool had been empty for 11 days. Every lane had been drained, scrubbed, and left under work lights while the town waited for the old building to be repaired. There should have been nothing above the tiles except dust, a little chemical smell, and the echo of the ventilation fans. Good evening. You're listening to the Midnight Monastery. Tonight, a maintenance supervisor stays late at a closed public pool and discovers that an empty deep end can still keep someone from reaching the surface. Eli Mercer had worked at Fairwater Baths for nearly a decade. He knew the ordinary noises of the place: pipes shrinking after heat, filters settling, pigeons landing on the glass roof. He had taken the night shift during the repairs because it paid a little extra and because he preferred buildings after the public had gone home. Fairwater was older than it looked. Its tiled hall had opened before the war, and the deep end had a dark blue band around it that never quite came clean. The modern changing rooms had been built around the original pool like a box around a bone. Eli had always thought it was a sad place, but never an uncanny one. On his first late inspection, he walked the narrow gallery above the drained basin with a torch in one hand and a clipboard in the other. Below him, lane lines had left pale tracks in the dust. A leaf lay in the shallow end. Nothing moved. Then water began to fall from the starting blocks. It was not much at first. One drop from block 1, another from block 2. Each struck the empty tiles with a sound too bright for such a large room. Eli leaned over the rail, expecting a leak in the old pipes. There was no water on the ceiling, no wet mark on the wall. The drops continued in a straight line, one beneath every block, as if the pool were filling itself from the wrong direction. When he reached the deep end, he saw a line of bare footprints on the tiles. They began at the drain, crossed lane 4, and stopped beneath the diving board. The basin was dry enough to show dust around every print. Eli went down the service stairs because he could not think of a reason not to. He held his torch low. The footprints were small, but not child-sized. They were the prints of someone who had stepped out of water and kept walking without ever becoming less wet. At the edge of the deep end, the last print faced the empty diving board. Above it, something gave a single, slow splash. Eli did not see anyone in the water because there was no water to look through. He stood in the deep end with his torch on the diving board and listened. The splash had come from directly above him. A second later, drops landed on his shoulder. They were cold enough to make him look up. The board was dry. The ceiling was dry. Yet a thin black line of water was running along the underside of the board and gathering at its far tip. It fell again. This time it struck the tile beside his shoe. Eli climbed out, finished the inspection as quickly as he could, and told himself the roof had trapped rain somewhere beyond the ceiling. By morning, the prints were gone. The work lights were off. The pool looked ordinary enough to embarrass him. The following night, the footprints returned. They began in lane 6 and ended one lane closer to the shallow end. There was another change as well. The blue numbers painted along the rim had altered. Fairwater's lanes had always been marked 1 through 6. Now the number above lane 4 had become 7. Eli scraped at it with his thumbnail. The paint did not move. He checked an old photograph on his phone. In the photograph there were 6 lanes. On the tile beneath his hand there were 7. He found the old caretaker's office behind the boiler room. It had not been used for years, and its drawers were full of invoices, lost goggles, and water-damaged newsletters. In the bottom drawer lay a black maintenance book with the pool's opening date written on its first page. Most of it was dull: pump pressure, chlorine readings, boiler failures. Then, halfway through the book, the handwriting changed. The entries became shorter and were written only after midnight. One entry described water appearing in a drained pool. Another described a swimmer seen at the bottom of lane 7. The final line had been underlined so hard the pen had cut through the page. It said that the pool did not make a new lane. It made room for the person who had stayed too long. Eli read that line 3 times. He knew how it sounded. He knew what anyone would say about an old book in an old building. Still, when the overhead fan clicked on by itself, he closed the drawer and took the book with him. At 1:17, the starting blocks began to drip again. This time, the water was rising from the drains. The water did not spread across the floor. It gathered in the deep end first, black and perfectly still, as though an invisible basin had been lowered into the empty one. Eli watched from the gallery. In less than a minute there was enough water to cover the drain. In 2 minutes it reached the first row of tiles. Nothing touched the walls. Nothing reflected the lights. Then a head broke the surface beneath the diving board. It rose slowly, facing the tiled wall. Eli could see only dark hair and the narrow line of a neck. The swimmer did not tread water. The water held the figure upright without moving around it. Eli backed away from the rail. He remembered the book in his coat pocket and the line about a person who had stayed too long. He remembered something else as well. Fairwater had once closed for a season after an accident. Everyone in town knew that much, though no one seemed to know the details. The archived newspapers were kept in a cabinet outside reception. Eli found an article from 1968 folded around a photograph of the same hall. A boy had disappeared during an evening lesson. The pool had been searched, drained, and searched again. No body had been found. The article called it a tragedy without explaining what had become of him. Beside it was a smaller report from years later. A lifeguard had died after entering the drained pool alone at night. The report called it a fall. Eli understood then why the repairs had been scheduled after closing time, and why the contractor had refused to work past midnight. No one had told him. They had simply assumed a new supervisor would learn the same way everyone else had. Below him, the figure turned. Its face was pale and blurred by the surface, but its eyes were open. It looked not at Eli, but toward lane 7. The painted number had changed again. It now read 8. The figure began to swim. Its arms moved through black water without making a sound. It crossed lane 7, reached the place where lane 8 should have been, and disappeared beneath the tiles. The water vanished with it. On the dry floor, a single wet handprint remained beside Eli's service stairs. It was the size of an adult hand. Across the palm, in the powdery blue of old tile paint, someone had written his name. Eli did not return home that morning. He sat in the staff room until daylight and called the contractor, the council office, and the number listed for Fairwater's former manager. No one answered. At 9, the pool reopened to workers as if the night had not happened. During the day, lane 7 was gone. The basin held 6 lanes, 6 starting blocks, 6 painted numbers. Eli found the black maintenance book where he had left it, but the underlined entry had changed. The page now recorded only a routine drain inspection. For a while he considered leaving. He could have handed in his pass, walked away from the town, and let the next person take the night shift. But the handprint had carried his name. It had not been a warning meant for someone else. That evening he searched the building's plans. Beneath the pool was an old balancing tank, sealed after the renovation in the 80s. It had been designed to hold overflow water. According to the plans, it ran directly below the deep end and had one narrow access hatch in the pump room. The hatch had a new padlock on it. Eli found the key in the former manager's desk. It was tied to a plastic tag marked with a number he had never seen before, 7. Inside the tank, the air smelled of rust and wet stone. His torch found a ladder, a concrete floor, and a thin shine of water at the bottom. The space was far larger than the plan suggested. Every sound returned to him late, as though it had to cross a room twice the size of the one he was standing in. At the far wall were 6 old lane markers, painted directly onto concrete. Beneath them were names, not names carved in graffiti, but names written neatly in the same dark blue paint as the pool numbers. There were 6 names in all. Below them was a blank line. Eli heard water move behind him, not a splash, a swimmer's steady stroke, close enough that each pull seemed to pass under the grate at his feet. He ran for the ladder. The key slipped from his hand and struck the floor below. In the echoing dark, it sounded like a starting gun. When he looked down, the water in the tank had reached the first rung. Eli made it out of the tank, but the padlock would not close again. Its shackle bent in his hands as though it had been softened by heat. He left the hatch open and spent the next hour shutting down every pump in Fairwater Baths. At 1:17, the lights failed. The emergency lamps came on in red strips along the gallery. Below them, the empty pool had filled to the rim. The water was black, flat, and level with the tiles. It did not overflow into the gutters. It simply existed where it had decided to exist. 6 figures waited beneath the surface. Eli could see them only when the red lights dimmed. A child near lane 1, a woman in a lifeguard shirt near lane 3, a man holding a ring of keys near lane 5. None of them moved. All of them faced the diving board. Lane 7 was empty. Then the water at the far end folded inward. The figure Eli had seen before rose from beneath it, taller now, with a dark shape of hair plastered over its face. It did not climb onto the tiles. It pointed toward the open hatch in the pump room. Eli understood the offer without hearing a word. The tank was the place beneath the pool. The names on the wall were not a record of accidents. They were places kept for people who had come down to investigate and had not found a way back. He thought of the blank line. He thought of every worker who would arrive in the morning and of the contractor's crew who would begin cutting through the old pipework. Closing the hatch would not stop the water. It would only make the next person curious enough to open it. So Eli crossed the gallery, entered the pump room, and pulled the emergency drain lever. Nothing happened at first. Then every light in the hall went white. The water in the pool began to turn clear. The figures beneath it moved for the first time, not toward him, but away from the deep end, swimming in a slow line toward the shallow end where no exit existed. The last figure remained beneath lane 7. It raised one hand to the surface. Eli saw the blue paint across its palm. His name had washed away. The drain roared. The water fell. The figures went with it, drawn down through a gap that should not have been there. When the basin was dry again, the tile above lane 7 was blank. The next morning, Eli did not tell the council what had happened. He told them only that the drain lever had failed and that the balancing tank needed to be inspected before anyone returned to work. The answer came back before lunch. The tank, he was told, had been filled with concrete in 1984. There could be no hatch. There could be no room beneath the pool at all. Eli stood with the phone against his ear and looked through the staff room window at the pump room door. A thin line of water was running from beneath it, crossing the corridor and stopping at his shoes. That evening, an elderly man came to the reception desk. He wore a wool coat that was too heavy for the weather and held a folded timetable in both hands. He asked whether the baths were open. When Eli said they were closed for repairs, the man looked relieved. "Then you have time," he said. His name was Arthur Vale. In 1968, he had been the young lifeguard on the night the boy disappeared. He had come back each year to look at the pool from the road, but had never been able to make himself enter. Arthur told Eli that the boy's name was Daniel Rowe. Daniel had stayed after a lesson because his older sister was meant to collect him. She had not come. There had been an argument at home, and she had gone to the pictures instead. Daniel waited on the tiles, then tried to cross the deep end alone so he could prove he was not frightened. Arthur had heard the splash. He had reached the water in seconds, but when he dived, the pool had become deeper than it could be. He saw Daniel below him, one hand raised, not sinking, only waiting. Arthur ran out of breath before he could reach him. The next time he opened his eyes, he was on the tiles. The pool was empty. Daniel was gone. "I kept thinking he was asking me to save him," Arthur said. "But after a while, I wondered if he was asking me not to leave him there alone." He placed the folded timetable on the counter. Inside was a class photograph. Daniel stood at the end of the back row, small, pale, and already looking as if he had been caught too far from the light. On the back, Arthur had written one sentence every year since 1968. "I did not forget you." At 1:17, every light in the reception hall flickered. From the empty pool beyond the doors came the clear, familiar sound of a child taking a breath before a dive. Arthur would not go near the basin. Eli did not blame him. The old man stood in the doorway, pressing both hands around the timetable, while Eli went down to the gallery alone. The pool was dry when he first looked over the rail. Then a dark ring appeared at the deep end, widening without a ripple. Water rose inside it until the old blue band disappeared. The 7 painted lanes returned, though Fairwater had only ever had 6. Arthur whispered Daniel's name. The swimmer surfaced at the far end. This time the face beneath the wet hair belonged to a boy. He looked no older than 12. His eyes did not look angry. They looked tired, as if he had been holding his breath for far too long. The other figures stood beneath the surface behind him. The lifeguard, the caretaker, the people whose names Eli had seen in the tank. They were not swimming now. They were gathered along the invisible edge of lane 7, facing the boy as though waiting for him to choose. Arthur started down the stairs, one hand sliding along the rail. Halfway down, he stopped. The water had reached the top step, though it had not risen anywhere else. "I came back," he said, not loudly. "I should have come back sooner." The boy lifted one hand. In it was a brass whistle on a rotten cord. Arthur had kept a whistle on a chain for 40 years. Eli had noticed it beneath his collar when he entered. Now Arthur pulled it free. It was the same shape, the same small dent near the mouthpiece. He held it out over the black water. "I blew this for help," Arthur said, "and when no one came, I stopped. I thought there was nothing left to do." For a moment, nothing changed. Then a second whistle sounded from under the water. Arthur stepped down another stair. The cold water reached his ankles. Eli caught his arm, but Arthur only shook his head. "Not to bring him up," he said, "to tell him I heard him." He put the whistle to his lips and blew one long note. The sound filled the hall. The lights went out. In the dark, Eli heard dozens of wet hands striking the tiles, not in panic but in rhythm. A swim lesson beginning, a count before a dive. When the emergency lamps came on, Arthur was standing in water up to his knees. Daniel was at the edge of lane 7, close enough for his pale fingers to touch the first step. Then something below the boy pulled hard. Daniel vanished. Arthur cried out once, and the water rushed toward the deep end as if a plug had been removed from the world. When the water disappeared, Arthur was lying on the tiles with his coat soaked through. He was alive, but the whistle was gone. Behind the diving board, a narrow crack had opened in the tile. It ran from the edge of lane 7 to the service wall, where no lane should have been. From inside came the low sound of water moving through a pipe. Eli remembered the blank line beneath the names in the balancing tank. He understood something he had missed. The pool was not holding people because it wanted company. It was holding every unfinished rescue, every person who had gone down believing they could make things right alone. Arthur had almost joined them because he had gone into the water with the same thought. They carried him to the staff room and called an ambulance. Before he left, Arthur pressed the class photograph into Eli's hand. "There was one thing I never told anyone," he said. "Daniel's sister came to the pool after we closed it. She stood at the gate every night for a week. I told her to go home. I said there was nothing there." On the back of the photograph, beneath Arthur's yearly sentence, another line had appeared in fresh blue ink. "She is still waiting by the door." Daniel's sister, Mara Rowe, still lived in Fairwater. Eli found her address in an old council directory. He did not go that night. He went in daylight, carrying the photograph in an envelope and rehearsing explanations that sounded cruel before he said them. Her house stood at the end of a quiet street behind a hedge of overgrown rosemary. A white plastic chair faced the front gate. Beside it was a pair of children's sandals, turned neatly toward the road. Mara opened the door before he knocked. She was a small woman with a silver braid and the watchful expression of someone who had spent her life expecting a late arrival. When Eli said Daniel's name, she did not ask how he knew it. "Is the pool open again?" she asked. Eli said no. She nodded, almost relieved. Then she showed him a drawer filled with letters, one for every year after Daniel disappeared. She had written to her brother at the baths because she had been too young to say goodbye on the night it mattered. "I posted them in the box outside," she said. "They always came back wet." At the bottom of the drawer was a letter dated the week of the accident. It had never been opened. The address was simply Daniel, Fairwater Baths. Eli asked whether she wanted to take it to the pool. Mara looked toward the empty chair by the gate. "Only if you do not leave me there," she said. They returned to Fairwater just before midnight. Eli had expected Mara to bring the old letter. Instead, she carried the whole drawer in a shopping bag, each envelope tied with faded ribbon. The council had locked the building after the ambulance left, but Eli still had his pass. The pool hall greeted them with the smell of cold tiles and chlorine. Nothing dripped, nothing moved. Mara walked directly to the deep end. She had not been inside the bath since she was 10, yet she knew exactly where the steps were. At the edge, she set the shopping bag down and read the first letter aloud. It was an apology for missing their walk home from school. The second was about their mother's cooking. The third said that she had found his red scarf behind the washing machine and had washed it even though it was still clean. As she read, a dark line of water gathered beneath the diving board. The hall grew colder. Eli stood beside her, not touching her, but close enough that she could hear him breathe. By the seventh letter, the surface had formed. Daniel appeared beneath it, no longer at the far end. He was standing on the first deep end step, water to his waist, listening. Mara stopped reading. Her hands began to shake. "I was angry with you," she said. "That night I was angry and I wanted you to wait. I thought you would always be there when I was ready to come back." The boy raised his face. For the first time, the water around him moved like ordinary water. Behind him, the other figures shifted. Eli saw the lifeguard in the red-lit reflection, then the caretaker, then people he did not know. Their hands were not reaching for Mara. They were holding the sides of Lane 7, keeping it open. Mara took the final letter from the drawer. It was the oldest one, yellow at the edges. She did not open it. She held it out over the water. "This is the one I should have said," she told him. "You do not have to wait for me now." The envelope left her fingers but did not fall. It landed on the surface and floated toward Daniel. He took it carefully. His hands were not pale anymore. They were simply small. The water began to drain, slowly this time. The boy stepped backward with it, still looking at his sister. Mara reached for him. Eli caught her wrist before she could enter the pool. Daniel shook his head once. Then he smiled very slightly and touched the whistle at his chest. The old brass note sounded beneath the water. Every light in Fairwater turned on at once. In the morning, the crack behind the diving board had closed. The balancing tank hatch was where the plan said it should be, beneath a section of solid concrete, with no keyhole and no number 7. Arthur came to the baths once he had left the hospital. He stood with Eli and Mara beside the drain deep end. The three of them looked at the blue tiles until the ordinary daylight made them seem almost harmless. There were 6 lanes again. Mara left the shopping bag of letters with Arthur. Together, they carried it to the old memorial board in the entrance hall, where the council had hung a small brass plaque for Daniel after his disappearance. Arthur placed the class photograph behind the frame. Mara set the red scarf beside it. No one called it an exorcism. No one used the word haunting. They spoke about a boy who had been missing too long, a sister who had been left alone with a sentence she could not take back, and a lifeguard who had finally returned to say that he had heard. Fairwater Baths opened 3 months later with new lights, new paint, and a new sign in the lobby. Eli stayed until the opening day. He walked the gallery once before the first swimmers arrived. The pool was full of bright blue water. Children shouted. A lifeguard blew a whistle because someone had run too close to the edge. For a second, Eli felt the old cold press against the back of his neck. Then he saw a small wet handprint on the glass beside the deep end. It was at shoulder height, as if someone on the other side had pressed a palm against the pane. In the center of the print was a faint blue mark, not a name, but a short line drawn across the skin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No 7th lane. Eli keeps the maintenance book in a locked drawer at home. The old entries have returned, but the final sentence is different now. It says the pool does not make room for the dead. It makes room for the words that were never carried to them. And when the building is quiet, when the last swimmer has gone and the filters have settled, Eli sometimes hears a whistle from the deep end. Not an alarm, not a warning. Just one clear note, followed by the sound of a child climbing the steps. Good night. If you ever find a place holding on to someone who has been gone too long, do not go into the dark water alone. Stay by the edge. Say the thing you have been carrying, and leave a light on for the next person. Like, share, and subscribe. Sleep well if you can. Eli did not sleep easily after Fairwater reopened. For the first few weeks, he woke at 1:17 with the taste of chlorine in his mouth. He would lie still in the dark and listen for water in the pipes of his small flat, listening until the ordinary morning traffic made the room feel safe again. Sometimes there was nothing. Sometimes he heard one careful drop strike the kitchen sink. Arthur telephoned every Sunday. He had joined the baths as a volunteer, not as a lifeguard, but as the man who checked that the memorial flowers were fresh. Mara came on the first Monday of each month. She sat in the spectator seats for an hour and watched children learn to float, then went home before the building closed. One evening, a little girl in a yellow costume lost her goggles near the deep end. Her father was ready to leave them, but she stood at the rail and began to cry. Eli went down with the long pole. The goggles were caught against the drain cover, bright and ordinary under the blue water. When he lifted them out, he saw a shadow pass below his own reflection. It was only a boy swimming toward the steps. He did not look back. He climbed from the water, dripping, and disappeared behind the changing room door. Eli did not call after him. He did not follow. He set the yellow goggles on the rail where the little girl could reach them herself. Later, when the final lights were being switched off, he found a damp corner of the old maintenance book. Someone had written one final entry in the blue paint that never washed away. The water remembers the way out. Eli closed the book and put it back in the drawer. Outside, rain tapped softly on the glass roof. Inside, the pool settled into its usual noises, filters, pipes, distant laughter fading from the changing rooms. At 1:17, nothing happened. For the first time in months, the quiet did not feel like it was waiting for someone to drown in it.